So my name is Nour, and I'm from Denmark. I grew up in the countryside in Denmark, in a smaller town. I come from Christian/atheist family, so we were not particularly religious in our family, but we have Christian inheritance due to our culture in Denmark. So my clearest memory of my childhood was growing up at our farm, and being in contact with nature really helped me develop a sense of a connection towards something divine, something greater than yourself. So that's the most important part of my childhood, as I remember it now as an adult. I first came across Islam, of course, through media, but I never paid much attention to it. It wasn't until a day when I was around 18, I had a dream of going to college. So I went to college at the time, and I was studying philosophy. I was into philosophy classes. And it was only during their philosophy classes that I noticed that I had like questions about life. Life in my head wasn't as simple as my family or my cultural background might want it to present it as. And I found myself searching and reaching for all different kinds of answers through philosophy. And one night I had a dream where we were sitting in class and a man came to the door and the teacher opened the door. We couldn't see the man, but we could hearing like the teacher talking to the man. And she then came back with a book. And she said, "This is a book for you." The man presented the book to me, and he told me to tell you, this book is the Quran. And if you open the book, you will find your name written in it. And I asked her, so who is the man? And she mentioned the name of the man. And waking up in the morning, I was then introduced to not only Islam, but also the Shi'i path of Islam. And that became my introduction to Islam. So I started searching, Googling, even going to the local library. We had like 5 books on Islam, all rubbish. But that's also been a motivation for me to do more for my community. But that was the real first encounter I had with Islam. Later on, it took me around 2 years to really decide whether I wanted to become a Muslim or not. Through those 2 years, I was introduced to all different kinds of aspects of Islam. Of course, going through online means, you find discussions that are beautiful and they inspire you towards Islam, but you also find debates and discussions that draws you away from Islam. So it's not only from non-Muslim and the non-Muslim narratives of Muslims, but also the debate and discussions among Muslims. So there are things you find so strange. I think, oh, these things can't be in line with the other things I've also learned about Islam through the online means. So it took me around 2 years to really decide. It wasn't until one night I was with my friends and something had happened, something that I thought of as being immoral. And we were discussing these issues, and I really found myself in a position there thinking, how can I live my life and knowing something is true, but I can't really practice this, I can't talk about it. I couldn't tell these people, oh, this is immoral because of Islamic teachings. And that was the first time I felt completely strange in my own community, in my own family, and with my own friends. And that was the night when I came home, I Googled how to become a Muslim. So I recited the Shahada online, probably not recited very well because I have no idea how to pronounce Arabic. But I woke up that morning feeling that it was something new, like you have felt in love all over again. So there's this love that God gives you when you first convert. And that love is the love that you need. Like when you fall in love with your spouse, there's a reason why you're falling in love in the beginning. It's because like you had to adjust to this new environment, but you need that extra strength. And that extra strength comes from being in love with things. Like you can't see the bad sides of it, can you? You're just so into this love of this new aspect of yourself. And the following night, I had a dream again. So I hadn't had any dreams for 2 years. Of course, I had regular dreams, but not anything related to Islam. And that night, I had a dream again. But this time, it was a different scene. So it was still not in the desert. It used to be a town, but you could tell that the town was ruined. There was nothing left in the town. And the sun was slowly rising in the horizon, but it's all dusty, so you couldn't see anything. And from the horizon, I saw a man walking towards me. And as he was approaching closer, the sun was rising behind him, so I couldn't really see him. And he was standing in quite a distance from me. And he told me, "Come with me." And he turned around and he left. And I was walking behind him in his footsteps, and I was keep on asking him, "Where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going?" And he wouldn't answer me. He just told me to be patient, you know. And we came. There was like a house. It was a house underground. It reminded me of like a safe house. And I went in there. He didn't go with me. He was standing outside and he showed me the way in. And I went in. I saw lots of other people there. Then I ran out again, and he was already walking away. He seemed like he was distressed. There was something that he needed to do. And I ran after him. I said, "Why am I here? Like, what am I doing here?" And he told me, "That's a good place for you. I have things I need to do, but you need to stay there." And I asked him, "But who are you?" And he told me the same name that I heard 2 years before in the dream of my classroom. So that was a thing that really convinced me that I need to be here. This is my position. And no matter what kind of hardship that happened the last 10 years of being a Muslim, I always need to remind myself of this dream, of this person telling me, "You need to be there. This is the right position for you." As for the thing that attracted me towards Islam, it was especially the manners of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family. One of the narrations I found was this, and it's from the Prophet, peace be upon him: "He who treats people in such a way that he never wrongs them, and when he speaks to them, he never lies to them, and when he makes a promise to them, he never breaks it. Such a person is perfect in his qualities and is perfect in his justice." That was one of the things that I really loved about this, that you always have to respond in a good manner. There was not one time I read any biography of the Prophet or the family, peace be upon them, where it wasn't a good response. It was not this perfect response. As in the collection of the rights of Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, where he talks about the rights of the neighbor. And he mentioned this: if your neighbor is doing something wrong, you should conceal it. And to me, it was so beautiful that instead of going around and telling people what other people do of wrong actions, no, you should conceal it. That's the right of that person over you, not only for the neighbors, but in general for everyone. Another one from the collection of the rights was if a person has a claim over you. And when he mentioned if that person is wrong in his claim, if in reality he doesn't have a claim over you, but he argues that he has, then you should still treat him with kindness and compassion. Those are kind of character traits where I longed for. Those gave me meaning of my life. Those were just, it's a motivation for you always to do better. And one of the reasons why I had a hard time believing in God in the beginning or before becoming a Muslim was like, you see so much injustice, so much, and you don't know how to deal with it. Like, we all carry this pain with us, right? We all carry it, and we just pass it on to other people all the time. And all the pain that other people pass on to me, how would I deal with this? Would I pass on the pain to other people? Or would I deal with it in the same way that the Prophet and his family, peace be upon them, did? So those were great motivations for me. Another one is the narration from Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, where he's describing what faith is. And he says it's like steps, right? All of us stands on these steps behind each other and above each other. And he said faith is like if you are knocking the other person down from those steps or those stairs, the person before you could also knock someone down. So everyone is a community, but one unit. And everyone is standing on these steps or these stairs. And if the person in front of you is knocking you down, you're going to fall upon the person who is standing on the step below you. And then he argues that if you knock someone down, also meaning if you ruin the belief or the religion of another believer or another person, you are the one responsible for picking them up. If you see someone who's below you, you should raise them. It's your responsibility to do that. We all have a responsibility towards each other. So it's always be a person have a responsibility over me, and I will always have a responsibility over another person. And in this way, we will protect each other as one unit. Those were the kind of narrations and character traits and morals that I loved and I fell in love with. And that's why I chose Islam. And I thought to myself, if that's the moral of these people, forget about philosophers, right? But look at the morals of these people. If they argue that there is one God, there must be one God. So I didn't come to Islam through knowing God, but I came to Islam through knowing the Prophet and his family, peace be upon him, and then later on getting to know God through them. Some of the things that pushed me a bit away in the process of these 2 years was the narrative used of other people, meaning the non-Muslims, or Muslims in between, or the narratives used by men of women and the other way around. So the narrative that, because I come from a culture where everyone is equal, and that was my belief in God too. So if God created us as equals, it doesn't matter whether you're black or you're white, or it doesn't matter where you come from. I can come from another background. I'm still equal in the eyes of God, because we all judge upon like our actions and our deeds and our qualities. But some of the narratives I saw in these online debates and some of these posts suggested that we're not, that some are better than others. And those were the kind of things that made my journey towards Islam. I paused a bit when I saw these kind of things. But I think it was a good process. Also knowing there's like knowing both sides and really had to reflect upon it. Because if you enter Islam and only thinking good, then you meet Muslims and then you hear these narratives and you might kind of fall back, or you might fall out of love with Islam again. So after I became a Muslim, I moved, around 6 months after, I moved to the capital of Denmark, meaning Copenhagen. And I started the university there. And the first woman I saw wearing the headscarf, the hijab, I ran to her and I felt so embarrassed of like telling her I'm a Muslim. I was obviously not wearing hijab myself, so she couldn't tell. So I was trying to introduce to her. So I was like asking her, oh, do you go to the parties here at the university? What did you do like for Ramadan? And she was explaining it to me. She was like, why are you asking? I was like, oh, it's because I'm a Muslim too. And to be honest, I don't have any Muslim friends. I don't know any Muslims, but I would really like to get to know other Muslims. And that was when I discovered that learning how to pray online is not always, you're not really getting to know the complete essence of prayer. So I was introduced to prayer. I started to pray the first week after becoming a Muslim. And I tried to do the Arabic part, and luckily like she was there to help me afterwards. But also understanding how to combine units of prayer. So I knew how to pray 2 units of prayers, but I didn't know how to combine from the second to the third unit. So I always just prayed 2 units of prayers. And because the term of the sunset was in Arabic, I just prayed at the sunset too. I didn't understand. So there's so many things that you miss when you don't interact with Muslims. I think materials have become better during the years, but at that time, I never came across anything that I understood. And I think there's also something that we can take a lesson from. That when people enter religion, or when people are young and have all these questions, we should listen. Because they are the one teaching us or telling us, this is what would have been easier for me. So for my perspective right now, being a Muslim for 10 years, there's so many things that's implicit. But back then, it was hard even combining a prayer from the 2 units to the third unit. She then taught me that. She taught me different things. She came from an Iraqi background, Shia as well. So that was a beautiful blessing in my life that I identified as a Shia. Then the first person I met was also a Shia. She later on invited me to stay with her family. So I lived in a dormitory at the university, and her family had a spare room, and they invited me to stay with them. And those years have been so important of my self-understanding as a Muslim. Them teaching me simple things, or whatever Muslims argue simple things, but like learning how to read the Quran, or the habits of prayers, or the night prayer, or memorizing Quran, or the hijab, or eating habits. So habits come with culture, doesn't it? Like the way that we are brought up. But if you're not brought up in a Muslim culture, or in a Muslim community, or in society, everything is new to you. So those years were very important for my identity, my self-image, as my growth as a Muslim, because I got to live in an environment where I also could gain these habits. And I will not say every weekend, but once in a while we had a scholar visiting us. And the scholar would sit with us, the adults would sit there, and us younger, both girls and boys would sit there. And we would all have discussions and talk like it was perfectly normal. You could not sense that the scholar felt that he was better or had more knowledge than a person like me who just entered Islam. And he had this method where he would ask me questions, just random questions about how do you define something as good? How would you approach this situation, etc., etc. And I was speaking from my heart and whatever I believed in. And he will always tell me that's the truth. And then he would combine my answer with a narration of the Prophet or one of the Prophet's family members, peace be upon them. So it's a very good way of introducing Islam to me. And it also became the basis for my later studies and understanding of the relationship between us and scholars and knowledge in general. Like how do we interact and how do we gain knowledge? It also gave me a lot of confidence, thinking, you know what, God already gave you the answers. If he took you from a place with no Muslims and he introduced you to Islam and you now have the answers, maybe there is something within you that's also in line with what God's wanted from you. After being in the Shia communities for 2 years, I find it hard to understand why people who were born into this beautiful religion, as I thought it was, in my opinion, took some of the morals and lessons from the household of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as you took them for granted. So I came in this community with a version of Islam was very close to the books and very strict in the sense of we had to do what's right. We had to do what they taught us. So if we're going for Muharram and we're talking about justice, we have to act in a certain way according to that justice. And when you find that we're all humans, and we have our interests and we have our cultural backgrounds. So we might not always act in accordance to what our role models had taught us. And that caused confusion. So for one Ashura, we were inviting a Sunni scholar to talk about their love for the household of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And I then got introduced to Sunni Islam. After that, I approached the Sunni scholar and asked him, is it true that you also love the household of the Prophet? And he said, yes. So I might want to go and study in your community instead of my community. So it ended up me being in the Sunni communities for 2 years. And it was a huge blessing because I got ijazat in different areas within Sunni Islam, but also strengthened my own beliefs. But coming back to Shia Islam, coming back to the Shia communities, I felt ashamed and I felt like I had disappointed my Imam. I might not see the same way today, but at the time I felt like I had abandoned him. So I had a very close relationship in that sense with the imam. Because living on your own and being somehow lonely in the communities, because even we have beautiful gatherings doing Muharram, at night you go home to yourself. You don't have that gathering with your family. For Ramadan, you eat by yourself. For Eid, you celebrate by yourself. So that loneliness really drove me to be very close to the imam of our time. But not being in the communities for those 2 years where I studied with Sunni scholars, I felt ashamed, and I felt like I hadn't done right by him. Now I see it as, a process of learning, but at that time I had other feelings, and that drove me to start my Islamic studies. At the university in Denmark, I finished my studies in science of religion, history of religion, and Arabic, and then I got into Islamic studies, and especially Shi'i history. So I felt there was a lack of Muslim scholars in the West focusing on ethics, and that's why I chose to major in philosophy of ethics. So my whole approach was later on now towards God and towards my communities is through ethics. On the side, I also got into my online studies, and later on had the opportunity to move to Qom in Iran and lived at the house there, where I finished my master's degree in philosophy of ethics. Living in Iran opened a lot of doors for me in the sense of being able to meet with a lot of scholars, attend a lot of conferences, attend research committees, and also being a part of the house environment, where it's a normal routine of the day, normal habits of really understanding the beauties of supplication, the beauty of habits, the beauty of praying together, and having that unity that I longed for so many years in my communities. So as for the communities, we might find that there would be a blessing in changing some narratives. So that also means having an insight into ourselves, thinking how much of whatever I practice, how much of this is culture and my cultural background, and how much of this is religion. And how open can we be towards other people and their habits, and understanding that nothing is changed over one night or one day, being open even within the narrative. So we have beautiful narrations about people like Salman Muhammadi, like Bilal. We have a lot of ways that we can implement those teachings within our communities. So I remember one thing I had growing up in a different context, I ask a lot of questions. And also questions I don't find as rude or disrespectful, either towards my teachers or towards God or the religion. But I understood that sometimes the community I was in found it disrespectful because there was something they have grown up with. So questioning, why do you do certain things? Why do you say certain things? All these kind of things are just normal habits for people. I wanted to understand why. But it came off as me questioning their cultural background, me questioning their religion. And it wasn't until I came across the narration of Salman Muhammadi, where both narrated by Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, and also by the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, but where he separates the faith or the thoughts of Abu Dhar and Salman Muhammadi, and saying Abu Dhar would praise the killer or would kill Salman Muhammadi if he knew was really in his heart. But also concluding that Salman is one of the doors to God. So this introduced to us that we can have a lot of different approaches. We can have a lot of different ways of understanding God. So Abu Dhar may have one understanding of God and religion, and Salman might have another. And we should have communities where people should be able to have different approaches. And in the end, everything is habits, everything is cultural context. And if we are patient with other people, if we really implement the manners and the methods of the Prophet and his family, peace be upon them, I think we could have something good. I think we would attract a lot of people towards our communities instead of making them feel lonely or making them feel as strange or odd in the community.